Section 3 of The Treasure Chest of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Edmund. The Treasure Chest of My Book House, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The little man as big as your thumb with moustaches 7 miles long. A Russian Tale. Far, far behind the blue sea, in the midst of the pleasant meadows, stood a lofty city, and in this city ruled Tsar Wisehead with his Tsaritsa. There they lived a long time, and to their great delight 2 daughters were born to them. The elder so lovely that they called her Loveliness That Shines, and the other no less beautiful, whom they named Jewel Without a Price. In his joy, the Tsar made merry and gladdened his heart. But when all feastings and junketings were over, he began to be greatly troubled how to train up his beloved daughters. He built for them a white marble palace with pinnacles of gold and mother of pearl that shone like fire in the sun. They were laid to sleep on eider-down bed covered with sable coverlets and fed only with golden spoons. 3 nurses took it in turn to drive away the flies when the little princesses slept, and they were bidden to take care that the lovely sun never peeped into the children's room, that the cold dew never fell on them, and the cold wind never touched them. Yet with all this care, great was the anxiety of the Tsar concerning his daughters. He built a high wall around their palace to protect them, and then he built a higher wall, and then he built one higher still. And withal he was still just as anxious as he had been in the beginning. So he placed beside the little ones 77 nurses to watch them indoors, and 77 nurses to watch them outdoors, and 77 guardians to guard the walls of the palace. Thus Tsar Wisehead with his Tsaritsa and his 2 daughters lived many years. The princesses began to grow up and become beautiful maidens, and still the Tsar was just as anxious concerning them as he had been in the beginning. One day he sat thinking and casting over in his mind whether he should build a wall higher than all other 3, when he suddenly heard a great noise and commotion. There was a scampering up and down and to and fro in the courtyard. The outdoor nurses were crying, the indoor nurses were howling, and the guardians were bawling with all their might. The Tsar immediately rushed out and asked, "What's the matter?" Then the 77 men attendants and the twice 77 women attendants all fell down on their knees before him. "We are guilty," they cried. "Look now, the Tsarevnas have been carried off by a whirlwind." A strange thing indeed had happened. The princesses had gone out to walk in the garden to pluck a few sweet peas and a red poppy or 2, when suddenly a black cloud rose up above them. Whence it came nobody knew, and it blew right into the eyes of the nurses and guardians. Of what use then were all the walls? When the attendants came to themselves and began to rub their eyes, the princesses had been carried straight up in the air and were almost out of sight in the distance. Tsar Wisehead flared up with rage. "Off to the dungeons with all of you," he cried. "What? 77 indoor nurses, 77 outdoor nurses, 77 guardians, and you could not look after 2 Tsarevnas?" And now the Tsar was in sore affliction. He neither ate, nor drank, nor slept. Banquets at his court there were none, and the sound of the fiddle and the shawm were heard no more. Only sad grief sat beside him and sang her mournful dirge in his ear. But in time another child was born to the Tsar, and this time it was not a daughter but a son. Tsar Wisehead rejoiced greatly, and he called the boy Ivan. But he was wiser now than he had been before, so, though he gave the child wise teachers and valiant voivodes to surround him, he commended him to God, and built no high walls to protect him. And the Tsarevich Ivan began to grow and grow. He grew not by the day but by the hour, and what wondrous beauty, what a stately figure was his. One thing only weighed upon the heart of the Tsar. He saw nothing in the boy that he held for heroic valor or knightly skill. He did not tear off the heads of his comrades, nor break their arms and legs. He neither loved to play with lances of damask steel, nor swords of tempered metal. Good and beauteous was the Tsarevich Ivan. He amazed all men with his wit and wisdom, and his greatest delight was to play on the harp that needed no harper. Ivan played so well that men forgot all else but the music as they listened, and those who heard him danced for joy. But with all these, his son's gifts, the Tsar could not see that there was one among them that would enable him to hold his kingdom against an evil foe. So one day he called Ivan before him, and thus he spake, "My beloved son, good art thou and beauteous, and I am well content with thee. One thing only grieves me. I do not see in thee the valour of a warrior, or the skill of a champion. Thou dost not love the clash of steel lances, and the tempered blade has no charm for thee. Look now, if evil foes should come upon us, what couldst thou do to defend us?" The Tsarevich Ivan listened to the words of the Tsar, his father, and thus he made answer, "Dear Tsar and father, both courage and strength are mine, yet do I trust rather in sagacity than in the clash of steel. Not by cudgels, but by wisdom will I prevail against the foe. Make trial of me this very day. Make trial of my youthful valour. Look now, they tell me that I have 2 sisters whom the whirlwind carried away, and the rumour of them vanished as if it were covered with snow. Call together now all thy princes, thy heroes, thy stalwart voevods, and bid them do thee the service of finding the Tsarevnas. And if any one of them, with all their damask blades, their iron lances, their glowing darts, and their countless soldiery, shall offer himself to do thee this service, then give to him my tsardom, and bid me unto him a scullion to clean his pots and pans. But if they cannot render thee this service, then I will render it thee, and thou shalt see that my wits are keener than a damask blade, and stronger than a lance." The words of the Tsarevich pleased the Tsar. He called together his boyars, his voevods, his strong and mighty champions, and he said to them, "Is there any one of you, my strong and mighty champions, hero enough to go and seek my daughters? If so, to him will I give to choose which of my daughters he will to be his wife, and with her he shall have half my tsardom." The boyars, the voevods, and the champions looked one upon another, and hid one behind the other, but not one of them dared to speak. Then the Tsarevich bowed before his father, and said, "Dear father, if none will take it upon him to render thee this paltry little service, give me thy blessing on my journey. I will go, I will seek my sisters, nor have I need of any royal gift from thee to urge me forth." "Good," replied the Tsar. "My blessing go with thee. Depart in God's name on thy journey. Take what thou wilt of my treasures, silver and gold, and if thou requirest soldiers, take a good 100,000 horse and 100,000 foot." But the Tsarevich Ivan answered, "I need neither silver nor gold, neither horse nor foot, neither sword nor lance. I will take with me my sweet-sounding harp, and I will not leave my wits behind. Nothing else do I need. And thou, my sovereign Tsar, await me these 3 years. Then, if I come not again, choose thee my successor." So Ivan received again his father's blessing, commended himself to God, took his harp under his arm, and went straight on his way whither his eyes led him. He went and went near and far, high and low, and as he went he played songs upon his harp. When night fell, he laid him down on the silky grass beneath the vast roof of the heavenly dome bright with stars, and when the sun in all his glory chased away the darkness like a flock of birds, he rose again and wended his way along. At last one evening he came to an opening in a dense forest. All around were enormous oaks and pines lit up by the rays of the setting sun, and in the midst of these, within a railing, stood a little house. It was supported on hen's legs that walked about and kept twirling it round over the yard. And Ivan cried out, "Turn round, little house, turn round, I want to come inside. Let thy back to the forest be found, thy door to me open wide." The little house turned round. Ivan stepped in at the door, and there in the hut was sitting Baba Yaga, the bony one. Fie, 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 why hast thou come here where no Russian soul ever enters? Cried Baba Yaga. Ask me no questions tonight, little granny, said Ivan. Morning is wiser than evening. Give me food tonight. At these words Baba Yaga leapt up in the twinkling of an eye, heated her little stove, and prepared him food and drink. Then she made him a soft bed, and leaving him in the little house that went walking about on hen's legs, she passed the night out of doors. In the morning Ivan spake to her thus: I go to seek my sisters, loveliness that shines, and jewel without a price. Tell me, my dear little granny, if thou knowest, what way must I go, and where will I find them? I know where they are, said Baba Yaga. They are kept prisoner by the little man as big as your thumb, with moustaches 7 miles long, and a fierce little man he is. His strength is as the whirlwind. He can pull up an oak by the roots. Nay, said Ivan, be his strength thrice 10 times that of a man, God will not give over a Russian soul to fall before such a swine as that. Where may I find him? The way to his cave among the rocks is long and difficult, said Baba Yaga. But if thou wilt follow the road before the door, thou wilt come at length to a little hut with a garden and a sheepfold that he pulled up and carried away at one swoop from a little peasant of the steppes. If thou canst contrive to meet him there, thou wilt be saved a long journey. So Ivan thanked Baba Yaga for her bread and salt, bade her farewell, and was off. He strode and he strode, striding with great strides. He travelled that day, and the next, and the third also, with nothing but the blue sky above his head and the broad wild steppes on every side. At length he came to a little hut with a tiny sheepfold and a tiny garden. He knocked at the door. There was no answer. He peeped in at the window. It was quite empty. So he lifted the latch and walked in. Then he sat himself down to think of some way to bring the little man to him. After short consideration, he took the kettle that hung in the fireplace, filled it full of green cabbages and what not from the garden, and set himself to make a savoury stew. When it was all well a-boiling, so the pleasant smell rose up the chimney and floated off in the air, he hung up his harp by the chimney bench to keep it out of harm's way, and sat down again to wait. Almost at once there came a rumbling and a thundering from without. The door was nearly torn off its hinges, and there stood the little man as big as your thumb, with moustaches 7 miles long. He looked at Ivan from beneath his beating brows, and shrieked with a terrible voice, "How dare you come into my hut as if you were its lord and master? How dare you make savoury stew out of my cabbages?" But Ivan looked at him calmly and said with a smile, "You ought to grow a little bigger before you shriek so." At that the little man fell into a fury. Seizing hold of both doorposts, he shook the whole house like a tempest. Then he flung himself violently on Ivan. But though his strength seemed thrice 10 times that of Ivan, Ivan was not afraid. Dodging well out of his reach, he seized the little man by the long moustaches and held on tight. Then he began to drag him around the hut and tumble him about. The little man, as big as your thumb, with moustaches 7 miles long, wriggled and writhed like a serpent. At length, with a terrible wrench, he jerked himself loose and was off, leaving the ends of his moustaches clutched tight in Ivan's fists. Ivan made after him swiftly, but whither, pray? All at once the little man flew up into the air like fluff and vanished. So Ivan knew no more than before where to search for his sisters. Henceforth, though he made many a savoury stew, the fragrance of which went up the chimney, the little man came no more. Then Ivan reflected and said to himself, "I will go to the river hard by, take a boat, and ferry people across. Of each who crosses I will take no money, but will ask that he tell me, if he knows, where I may find the little man as big as your thumb, with moustaches 7 miles long." So Ivan took his harp on his back, left the little hut, and went to the river. There he took a ferry boat, and for 1 whole year he ferried people back and forth, and he took no fare, but asked each one where the little man was to be found. Not one among thousands could tell him. But on the very last day of the year it befell that he had to ferry over 3 old pilgrims. Once across, the men got out on the bank and began to undo their purses. The first pulled out a handful of gold, the second a roll of pearls, and the third the most precious stones. "There, that is for thy ferrying, good youth," said the old men. But Ivan pushed from him all the gold and jewels. "Nay," he said, "I will take nothing from you. Tell me rather if you know where I may find the little man as big as your thumb, with moustaches 7 miles long." "Well for thee, good youth, that thou hast asked this of us," said the eldest of the pilgrims, "for thou hast but to wish thyself where the little man is, and we can grant thee thy wish." "Let me be at once where the little man keeps my sisters," cried Ivan. And before he could wink, he found himself in a deep chasm among the gloomy rocks by the sea, and near a dark yawning cavern before him the little man was sitting. "Ha! What brings you hither?" he screeched as he saw Ivan. "I have come for my sisters, the Tsarevnas, and you shall not escape me again," cried Ivan. But the little man laughed mockingly. Slipping into the cave in the great grey rocks, he came forth dragging with him the 2 lovely princesses. In a flash, while they stretched out their arms imploringly toward Ivan, he had them up the rock far out of Ivan's reach, and on the very edge of the cliff that overhung the sea. "I'll pitch them into the sea!" he roared. Ivan used his wits in a twinkling. Seizing his harp, he drew his hands across its strings and struck up a lively tune. As soon as that tune fell on the little man's ears, whether he would or no, he found his arms akimbo, and suddenly fell a-dancing. He skipped up and down, he stamped with his feet, he danced, and he could not leave off dancing. So angry was he that he roared and shrieked, but he could not leave off dancing. At the sound of that music too, the fish came up out of the sea, whales and sturgeons and herring and carp, not to speak of crabs and lobsters, and they all began to dance on the shore. They circled and spun and leaped, they hopped and skipped and tripped, and they could not leave off dancing. So the lovely princesses fled to their brother, and Ivan, setting down his harp, bade it go on playing of itself while he put an arm about each of his sisters and led them safely away. And the harp went on harping without a harper, and the little man went on howling and dancing. And the whales and the sturgeons and the herrings and the carp, not to speak of the crabs and the lobsters, all danced in a circle about him. But Ivan delivered his sisters in safety to their father. The Tsar and the Tsaritsa received their daughters with joy, and henceforth they commended them to God, but built no more walls around them. As to Ivan, he said to his father, "Thou seest, O sovereign Tsar, that not with force and valour alone may one prevail, but as well with wit and wisdom." End of section 3. Recording by Edmund.